One, two, three.
Okay. So I'll get it started. It's 5:02. So good afternoon, everyone, and good morning to those in earlier time zone. Welcome to the Yale Career Panel discussion on the Candid view of entrepreneurism. My name is Julie Sohn. I'm a Yale College alum, class of 2014, Seabrook, and will be moderating the panel today. So let me take a moment to give you a brief background of this series. So Yale Career Panel started in 2012 by a group of Yale alumni volunteers who wanted to provide a transparent view of different professions to both Yale students and graduates so that everyone can make more informed career decisions and can start their career with their eyes wide open. Over the last 8 years, we have held more than 35 panel discussions on professions ranging from traditional career paths such as law, finance, and consulting to some of the non-traditional paths such as architecture, music, and nonprofit. We also host a few fireside chat series every year where we discuss issues and opportunities that arise during a professional career. Recordings of all the previous panels and fireside chat, as well as the recording from today, will be available on yalecareerpanels.com. So today, we're going to spend the first 40 to 45 minutes on the panel itself with some time for Q&A at the end, and then we'll end a few minutes early so that people can join the breakout session for the networking opportunities, which you should have received a separate Zoom link. So we are very pleased to have two panelists, both whom are Yale alums and millennial entrepreneurs, Ellen Su, current Chief Product Officer at Wellings, and Max Nova, who is a co-founder of Sylvia Terra. So my first question goes to both of you. As you know, there are many companies, both large and small, that actively recruit Yalees. What led you down the path to start your own company versus applying to one of the jobs post Yale? Let's start with you, Max.
Yeah, well, sure. Well, for one, I'd say I was in Timothy Dwight, which is just cranking out these young entrepreneurs. Ellen was in there too, so ring the bell over there. But yeah, so I went into Yale and thought I was going to be pre-med and was swiftly disabused of that notion by some organic chemistry class. And yeah, sort of just accidentally lucked into finding a co-founder at Yale through the summer after my freshman year. I was doing research at the School of Forestry and met Zach Parasa, who's my co-founder and our CEO here at Sylvia Terra. And you know, I kind of got the bug for startup stuff when I was in high school doing some programming stuff. And yeah, it was my whole Yale experience was really spent building the company. And so by the time I graduated, we were making real revenue. You know, and I never even really kind of considered taking another job. I mean, I was hooked, and we were paying the bills, and I mean, we weren't making that much money, but it was enough to eat, and so we just kept going, and that was how I got into it.
Oh, that's amazing. Ellen, let's hear from you.
So I actually came into Yale with kind of the exact opposite direction, where I came to Yale specifically because I didn't want to do startups in tech. I grew up in the Bay Area, went to high school like 5 minutes away from Stanford. And I was like, I'm going to run off to the East Coast. I'm going to do fine arts. I'm going to be an art major. So I actually started off as a fine arts major in the kind of painting and printmaking concentration. And kind of through that experience, I think is a really, really great program. And actually, while I was there, got into like learning more about industrial design, human-centered design, and kind of design thinking more broadly. And so I got into that side of things. I think one of the things I appreciate about being at Yale is that you can take classes across a wide variety of subject matter. So instead of being at an art school where you're kind of like forced to do art classes, I actually, once I started getting into design thinking, started connecting with people in the engineering school who were interested in human-centered design and kind of designing solutions and products for people. So I started taking engineering classes my junior and senior year through I also founded the Design for America studio at Yale. And kind of through that experience, got connected with my co-founder, who is actually a TA in one of my classes. And, you know, we were interested in solving problems for people. And so we got involved in, you know, with research with scoliosis, because my co-founder had that when he was younger. So we got into looking at and exploring kind of what were the problems in treatment there. And from there, you know, we were able to take advantage of some Yale resources through the Center for Engineering, Innovation, and Design. We did their summer fellowship, and that actually brought that idea and kind of really solidified it and brought it into the world. And then we were able to connect with what was then the Yale Entrepreneurial Institute and what is now kind of under the umbrella of Sci-City, some of the entrepreneurship resources there, which allowed us to kind of start that off as a company. Part of the decision to actually work on the startup and not apply for jobs was because I was still an art major at that point, and I was kind of so terrified of the job application process. And like, I didn't think I could get a job with just a BA in fine arts. So I was like, I'll make my own job, I'll do this startup and see where it takes me.
Yeah, it's a fear of all the liberal arts majors out there. I myself was also a liberal arts major coming out of Yale, so definitely understand that point. Max, what did you study at Yale?
Well, so our CTO, Mike, also another great TD grad, he always makes fun of me because I technically studied computer science, but I got a Bachelor of Arts in computer science. He's like, who even does that? Is that even a thing? Yeah, I kind of got the bare minimum because I was really busy counting trees over at Sylvia Terra. But yeah, I technically studied computer science, but I basically spent my whole time building the company. Although I did take the grand strategy class. I got to say, I think about that class a lot, you know, doing startup stuff. So yeah, thanks Gaddis. That was yeah, that was a solid one.
Wow. And you know, all the people I'm sure are excited about the ideas of launching their own company, and some people are, you know, not sure about it. And I'm sure that while being an entrepreneur has a lot of exciting aspects, as you just talked about, I'm sure the reality is also very different. Can you tell us about some of the myths versus realities of being an entrepreneur?
Ooh, I can jump in. So I think I don't know if this is currently a myth, but kind of the myth that like, okay, you're going to start this, it's going to be great, and you're going to exit in 3 to 5 years. Like 3 to 5 years is only enough time to barely get off the ground. I think for startups, it's much less like, you know, you come up with a brilliant idea, you work really hard for you know, an intensive period of time, and you just kind of like flip it. It is much more a marathon than a sprint, and you really have to be in it for the long haul. So I think that's one of the myths, is like, oh, you know, everybody's looking for a quick exit and you get investors, and even if you're targeting that, it's still going to be, you know, a daily kind of marathon mindset more so than it is a sprint.
Yeah. So when I was at Yale, I went to a lot of startup talks and heard a lot of people say, oh, it's going to take like way more time and cost a lot more money than you think. And I was sitting there in the audience being like, those guys are a bunch of chumps. I'm way smarter than those guys. Like, yeah, I know that's the normal way that it goes, but I'm going to like rock this thing. And I am 10 years in now at this point. We started Sylvia Terra in 2010. And let me tell you, I've been getting punched in the face every single day for the last 10 years. And it's not that, you know, it's not actually that anything is particularly hard. It's that all the easy things are hard. You know, just getting everything right all the time, because it's all got to be right, you know, or mostly right, in order to all come together and work. And it's just like, it is an enormous amount of just little things. And, you know, I sometimes question, like, you know, should smart people even do startups? I'm actually not convinced the answer is yes, because, you know, if I think about over the last 10 years, like how much time have I actually like full on used my brain? Like maybe 6 months of 10 years, you know, and all the rest of it has just been like, take the arms, stick them into the blender and like go as far as they can go. And it's just like, it's brutal. And it's just like getting punched in the face every day, dealing with just stupid stuff. And that's what doing a startup is. You don't have all that institutional support. You don't get to be super specialized. It's you and there's reality, and you got to like figure out how to make it work. And it's like messy and complicated, and you know, none of it is like super high concept, you know, what you were taking in Econ 700 or whatever. It's just like, have you filled out the forms? Have you followed up with the right people? Have you, oh no, you weren't paying taxes on that thing? Like, uh-oh, well, you know, and so, yeah, it's a lot of that. So.
Yeah. So you gave a great examples about like even trying to check whether you're paying taxes and stuff. Was there any other surprising factors that you sort of realized that, oh, like I did not know that I had to do this as an entrepreneur in the beginning when you were, you know, working on your company?
I think one of the things that I ran into is like, you have to be really, really good, or you have to get really, really good at managing yourself. I think because you don't have anybody else really telling you what to do, you have to like supercharge yourself, and you have to be really, really honest with yourself. And it's like, okay, you know, I need to get this done. There's nobody else here that can do it. And there's nobody else here who has oversight over me getting this done. And I would find myself some days like making a list, like 20 items long of super critical stuff. And everything on that list had to get done. And there were things that I would just ignore for weeks and months because I was doing all the other really critical stuff. And finally, I would just call myself out on some of those things because nobody else was making sure that those were getting done. So you have to be like really, really brutally honest with yourself about like, okay, what's my motivation? How do I keep myself on track? How do I get myself going? I think one thing that helps is having employees makes things really, really real for you because you're kind of in charge of the livelihood of people. And so that's one element that kind of keeps you going in some of those circumstances. And I know Max has done a really good job of building a great team and running a company remote before it was cool. So, you know, there's a lot of soul searching in that process.
Yeah, I would say I've been surprised by the soul searching. I mean, like I'm generally like a pretty happy dude, like pretty like keep things on an even keel. But the like reality is like startup stuff is a total roller coaster, you know. And like there are days that are like unbelievable, and then there are days where you're like, you know, like at Sylvia Terra, especially in the early days. I mean, like we're 5 years in, but like you know we didn't raise money for years. You know, we bootstrapped the whole thing, and there's moments there where you like stare into the abyss, and you're like, oh man, like. That's definitely the abyss right there. And it's like, that is not like a one-time thing. That is not like, oh, we're over that now. Like that happens a lot. I mean, this happens at a lot of companies. If you go high up enough, it's just like reality is hard. Making anything happen in the real world, it's just unbelievably hard. And a lot of people don't appreciate that because they have so much institutional support and context that they don't like, you know, you kind of have structures that you can work within. But like when you're out there, like trying to just like create something, it's just like, you kind of don't know what's around the next corner. And like, you can get better at predicting things in the future. But like, you know, even now there's like, you know, there are moments where you kind of have that sinking feeling in your stomach and you're like, oh, here we go again. And so one of the things that, you know, I've found to be really important is just like, you gotta moderate the highs. You gotta moderate the lows. Like, you know, if you're like fully into it, you know, you're just like, yeah. And then it's like the lows are, you know, just the same. And so, you know, I generally try to keep it on a pretty like, even keel because otherwise you're going to go nuts. Like the internal state management for doing startup stuff is really important. Like I don't know who teaches that. Like, you know, they don't teach that stuff at Yale, but that's probably like the single most important thing. It's just like, how do you not go crazy? Like when you're just constantly confronted with like chaos and failure, and that's tough.
Yeah, and I will say like one of the things that really helped. Well, I feel like the constant mindset, it's like you can't let yourself get too hopeful. Like if you get your hopes up too far, like that's bad. If you get stuck in a rut for too long, that's bad. So it's like cautiously optimistic, I think, is the steady state where you're like, I'm going to be hopeful because I need to be hopeful in order to actually like get things going and motivate the team. But I'm not going to put all of my eggs in any one basket. And like, you just have to figure out, like, do a lot of risk analysis. And then for me, what really helped was having basically like a support group of other startup, like other co-founders or just other founders to just vent to. It was great. And for me, it's like sometimes it's specifically like women founders too, because then you can kind of level set and compare. It's like, okay, did this conversation go this way because of, you know, this experience? Like, did anybody else have this experience, or is this just like a startup thing? And being able to kind of have other people around you to share those experiences with is super important. And that was one of the things that kept me going, because it was both sharing and venting and having those experiences, but also being able to be that person for other people who are going through similar challenges.
Yeah, I can definitely agree to that. I just went through a recruiting cycle at MBA, and having a classmates who are going through the same cycle was definitely helpful. And just having, people to vent to and talk about the progress itself. So that's a great segue to our next question. Since Ellen, you mentioned that you have a group of co-founders that you could talk to and reach out to for resources. So I'm sure from your own experience of being an entrepreneur and having seen a lot of other people in the same field, perhaps from Yale, perhaps from other schools, what do you think are some of the key common characteristics of people who tend to do well and are happy versus not so happy? And it'd be great if you guys can just give us a few examples of that.
One of the things that's actually more external is having really great co-founders, and like having co-founders that have your back, that you can talk to and communicate with effectively, because you're essentially entering into a long-term relationship, and you actually have to develop those communication skills, probably even more to a degree more than you would with a romantic relationship. Like you have to be able, and maybe it's a little bit less personal, but like you are spending probably even more time with these folks than you are with your like actual significant others. So yeah, that was actually one of the biggest things that I saw. It was like people having co-founders that that they could disagree with productively. We shared space with another startup that like it was horrible. Like they would just be yelling at each other, and it was bad for everybody. And that is surprisingly more common than you'd think. And you have to make sure that you're in it for the long haul with your co-founders. But yeah, I know it's a little kind of external to the person, but it's so crucial.
Yeah, I'd say, I've been unbelievably lucky to have Zach, our CEO, as my co-founder. I met him when he was at the School of Forestry, and like we've got a very interesting dynamic where, Zach's 8 years older than I am. He came in really as sort of a subject matter expert. I was like a bright-eyed and bushy-tailed 19-year-old kid being like, I will do whatever it takes to like make this thing work and count all the trees. And we've actually had a dynamic that works really, really well, with him as more of the visionary, me as more of the operator. And, it's like Zach's like a brother to me at this point. Like we spent the last 10 years like in the trenches, and, it's like that makes such a big difference for how these things go. But, Julie, you said something about fun, and I wanted to address that, because in my view, fun is actually 100% optional in this thing, which is not like maybe a popular view here, but it's like or I call it type 2 fun. Like type 2 fun is when you're working really, really hard on a problem that matters. And it's like, cause like, have I been having fun, like type 1 fun, like most of this time? No, like my arms are like in the blenders. It's like not fun at all. Like, this is why they got to pay you to do this. And this isn't a hobby, cause it's like, that there are parts of it that like totally suck. And that is part of the job. That is, and so it's so important, I think, to actually be working on something that you think like, when things suck so hard, like you got to get up. Like Ellen said, no one else is going to do this for you. Like this is your job. And so if you're not, if you're not into doing it when it's not fun, like you kind of need to look for another job.
Yeah, it's definitely something where you might be, your interest might be piqued by like the highs of your roller coaster, but the thing that determines whether or not you stay for the game is like, can you weather those lows and can you make it through those? I find fun here and there. It's like things around kind of company culture building and the people that you work with. It's like being able to enjoy the team that you're with every day. That makes things a lot more bearable. Like if you're working with people that you like, and that's actually something when I talk to friends of mine who are working at much larger institutions, like they deal with a lot of you know, a lot of BS with just managing coworker relationships and company politics, and like, well, my manager's manager is doing this, which means I can't do these things, and you know, and that, all of that sounds miserable to me. The fact that like your life and your productivity and what you can do is just so hobbled by people that you can't really influence, versus in a startup, like a lot of those problems are just not there. But you have to make sure that you're keeping, like, that culture is a really precious thing, and that's kind of some of the stuff that makes it so that you can kind of tolerate each day, because you're working with great people. And that's the kind of thing that I think a lot of startups, when they scale, have trouble with. It's, you know, how do you scale that hiring process where you can't necessarily have direct contact, and you need to make sure that that culture grows with you as a company. And it's not always going to, you're not always going to bat 100 with those things. And so figuring out, like, how do you build a sustainable organization from that perspective. Also, like, you know, just doing fun things in your life. Like I mean, right now, I actually, because Wellings was acquired, and now I'm part of a larger institution, by which I mean, like, it's now a 10-person company and not like a 3-person company. You know, I get to do fun things like, okay, anytime we ship, like, each project or initiative that we're working on in our product team, we give it a name that's a dessert, and every time we ship something, like, everybody gets dessert. And so, like, you can have fun with things like that, and just to like keep the team together and motivated. So, you know, that doesn't patch up bigger problems. Like, you can't fix systemic problems with, like, just getting everybody donuts, but it can bring a little joy to the end of the week.
Sounds like a great excuse to get more dessert every week. So, Ellen and Max, you guys both mentioned a bunch of skills that seems to be pretty key to being a successful entrepreneur, like being a good having a good conflict resolution skill, having a clear communication skill, being able to even manage people, even on the smaller scale. And let's say that, and then you also mentioned that, you know, having a good co-founders and team and being able to collaborate is also important. What about those who are, you know, starting as a you know, just a single person company from the very beginning? Let's say it's like their first or second year and they don't have any other really co-founder that they're working with. What do you think are some of the more important aspects there? And what do you think are some of the aspects that might not be so great about the person to be an entrepreneur going forward?
Yeah, I would say the biggest thing people screw up is forgetting that you got to have contact with reality ASAP. Like whenever somebody tells me they're doing their business, like, you know, usually, like, you know, some smart Yale undergrad is like, oh, I'm starting a business or whatever. I'm like, if you have not made your first dollar by the time I talk to you next week, like, you literally have no business doing this. Like, you're going to spend a bunch of time building something that you think is a good idea, but, like, let me tell you, you're an idiot. You have no idea, like, what's going on. You've never done anything in your life besides get into Yale, you know, and that has, like, very little bearing on, like, what people actually care about in the world and what they're willing to pay money for. And, like, people, you know, like, because, like, Facebook didn't charge money for stuff at the beginning, think they can get away with, like, not actually making dollars on things. And it's just like this toxic idea. It's like, no. Like, the only thing real in this world is when somebody gives you $1. And, like, you know, if you're not doing that, you know, you don't have a business. You have, like, something that's going to suck up all of your time when you should have been, like, applying for consulting interviews and making a lot more money doing that. So, yeah, this is the classic blunder of people. They try to get to perfection or whatever. And it's like, no. Like, get somebody to give you $1, and it doesn't have to be great. Like, your product can be, like, really low, but you got to have, like, the kernel of something in there. You know, this is Eric Ries's, you know, lean startup stuff talks a lot about this, but it's, yeah, you got to actually do that. And that's hard. You know, none of this stuff is rocket science. It's just, like, kind of awkward to ask somebody to give you $1. And so a lot of people will do anything, but ask for the $1, but you got to do it.
Yeah, I will say sometimes the barrier of entry to getting to $1 is difficult. I will say, as a medical device person, you can't necessarily deliver what you get for $1, but you can kind of secure promises. But the difference between being in a pre-revenue and post-revenue medical device startup is night and day, because that is what a lot of investors are looking for, is that traction. And as soon as you say like, I'm revenue positive, I have money coming in, that checks off a lot of other boxes, because also it means that you have to have some kind of accounting system in place to keep track of those dollars, to keep track of the taxes, because then there's legal repercussions. If you don't have any money coming in, there's a lot of like random stuff that can slide because nobody's looking at you. But as soon as you start bringing in money, like there is oversight from someone, and at the end of the day, like you can't escape the IRS. So you have to have your stuff together. When you start getting in revenue. So it's kind of a proxy for that too. Other things, if you're a solo entrepreneur, you have to be really clear. Well, one, you have to be okay with learning new things. You are going to have to become an accountant. You're going to have to become kind of an operations logistics person. You're going to have to become a really organized person, regardless of like what your actual personality is like and what you're interested in. You're going to have to do those things. You're going to have to keep track of your expenses, what's coming in, what's coming out. Like, also, Yale is really bad at teaching you personal finances and accounting, of even just like making a budget. They're really horrible about that. And that is one of the things that I had to learn, both on a personal level, but also from a company level. And you have to get comfortable with learning that, and doing the really unglamorous stuff, because that is what your day-to-day is going to look like. It's going to be all the unglamorous stuff, and like sometimes it's the really great, like you're riding those highs, but a lot of it day in, day out is just logistics, operations, like making sure the cogs are all turning. So you do have to have that grit and that attitude to kind of learn what to do. But on the flip side, you also have to identify exactly when you can't do some of those things. Either you can't because there's not enough hours in the day, or you can't because you've like reached a limit in your in your ability to like learn that new skill in the time that you have. Or you've made that cost benefit analysis and you say, the time it would take me to learn this skill is going to sink other parts of my business. So it is more cost effective to hire someone to do this for me. And so then you become someone who then is able to delegate, whether that's to contractors, whether that's to employees, whether that's to, a team of 20 interns that you're paying for the summer. Like, you're going to have to figure out how to delegate. So, figuring out what you can delegate and what you can manage is also a skill to learn.
Yeah, well, this might be something where I disagree with Ellen on a little bit. You talked about medical device startups and a bigger, barrier to, get to market and all that stuff. Here's an unpopular opinion. I actually don't think first-time entrepreneurs have any business doing companies that have like super high upfront CapEx.
Oh, no,
and,
it's horrible. It's horrible.
Yeah, it is the worst. It is the worst. Now, Ellen like is the exception that proves the rule here, in a sense. And it's like, that is a very rare outcome. Like there's so many things about just like doing a business and selling and all that type of stuff that I think, especially if you're starting off and you're trying to like have your own idea and you're not like paired up with an expert, like you make it easy for yourself. There's like enough things that are hard, do something that doesn't, and you can want to build into a much bigger vision. Like at Sylvia Terra, from the very beginning, more or less, like we didn't quite say it this way, but as we wanted to build something that was going to make it so that every landowner and every acre could transact every value in the forest every year. So carbon, timber, wildlife, all this stuff. And we're not even close to there yet. But what we've done is we were able to start with something small, just the data, just counting the trees, and sell that and build a business around doing that. And we didn't have to have some huge upfront expense, and we were just going project by project. And then we partnered with Microsoft and we did the whole US. And now we're doing carbon, and from carbon, we're going to build to wildlife and then fire risk and all these things. But your role as an entrepreneur is to say, like, how do I start with just the absolute smallest kernel of something and get people to pay me some dollars for that, and then grow and grow and grow and grow over time? And what's that campaign where every step along the way you're demonstrating traction, you're creating more value, you're proving this out, you're building the team, and you're learning things. And a lot of people try to take shortcuts on that, and it like there's not many shortcuts that actually work out.
Yeah, I'll also say, just having seen a lot of people trying to attempt healthcare and medical devices, most of the problems in healthcare and medical devices are not technology problems. They are logistics, administrative, and operations problems. They are problems within their infrastructure problems, and they're not technology problems. So it is very unlikely that someone who doesn't work within that industry or who has an understanding of the like really precise ins and outs of that industry, it's very unlikely that you're going to come up with a solution right off the bat that works. You're going to bang your head against the wall, like trying to learn about the really convoluted ways that that the healthcare industry works before you can even get in the door with the people that will pay you money. That's not to say that it's impossible. It is doable, but you're going to have a lot of experts on your team. It's a difficult path. You have to really enjoy medical devices, or like find that really meaningful in order to actually not just, not like lose all motivation, because our healthcare system is super broken. And a lot of fixing it is going to be, trying to connect a lot of very disparate resources and competing interests together.
You guys mentioned both of you guys mentioned a lot of the soft skills that seems to be pretty key to being successful, like being able to make good decisions and being resilient and having a check with the reality there. Thanks for the example, Max. That was really helpful. So the next question is just for Ellen. So Ellen, you have an experience in not only starting your own company, but also managing the acquisition of your own company, as you mentioned. And, one of the things that you mentioned, the changes that you mentioned is, the size of the team has increased after that. In terms of your role, in terms of your career, what has been the biggest shift that you have seen, pre and post acquisition?
Yeah, I would say, so the acquisition, the paperwork was signed on December 30th of 2019. And I look back on them like, we had really great timing, because I don't know that it would have gone through if it had dragged into this year. One of the big things, and the acquisition itself, like it was an acqui-hire, and what you'll see a lot with startups is like they'll announce an acquisition and they'll say like for an undisclosed amount, and usually that means that it was kind of like they're acquiring something that's not just the business. And so in our case, they were acquiring the assets, but really what they were acquiring was kind of both myself and then the kind of the knowledge that we had building out a kind of a connected medical device platform. And we were talking to a couple of other strategic partners, and we had, an offer or two on the table. One, nobody's going to move until there's a competing offer on the table. Like, you have to create FOMO in order to actually get anything to move at any sort of speed. In terms of deciding where to go, it came down to the team that I would have been working with. And, I joined the new company, which, very confusingly acquired us and then rebranded as our name. And I joined as the chief product officer. So I went from being a CEO to being the chief product officer. Honestly, way happier at being in charge of product, because I get to focus on what I like doing, which is like building things and shipping things and seeing and like testing things with people. Like, coming up with product strategy, and it's now someone else's problem to handle like logistics and finances and all that. And I remember my first week on the job, this was like January 10th or something this year. And I was on a call with some folks. Like, it was a call between engineers in India, engineers in China, and it was happening at like 4 a.m. And we ended up at this point where, the engineers in China were like, oh, actually the guy who was working on this thing left and took the code with him, and we don't have anything, and Chinese New Year is in like 2 weeks. And then the country shuts down for 6 months, which ended up being more like 3 months it usually shuts down for like 4 to 6 weeks, and ended up shutting down for, months, because that was really like the big inflection point for COVID. And I just remember sitting on that call and I'm like, okay, the nice thing about this is like, this is my problem. Like, I have to go into problem solving mode, but it's not my fault. And that was such a great feeling, because it was like, previously, everything that happens, regardless of what you did, it's like, at the end of the day, it is your problem. Like, regardless of what is going on, you're the one who has to deal with it. And whatever messes there are, it's like, you're in charge of making sure that they get fixed, even if that's delegating to someone else. But with this, I was like, I could I could punt the football to someone else and be like, hey, can you deal with this supplier? And like, I'll focus on solving the problem that's in front of me right now and like fixing it and making sure it doesn't happen again. So it could be very forward focused instead of like kicking myself over what happened in the past. And I could, delegate some of those other things to other people. And that was a great feeling where, I was like, okay, not my problem. Someone else is dealing with this. So that was a shift. And it's, it's not necessarily like shirking responsibility, but it's you're not like the person who has the whole, like carrying the whole boulder at the end of the day.
Yeah, sounds like that's probably better as the company grows and there are many more problems to solve. Thanks for that. And then the next question I have is for Max. Max, you founded the company in 2010, as you mentioned, shortly after the Great Recession. What was that experience like? I mean, what is your thought on starting a company during such a turbulent economic period? And I think it might be helpful for, students or graduates who may be thinking about finding a company during this time, which is also another, sort of unprecedented time.
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, there's never, it's like having a baby. There's never like a great time to start a company. And like when you start off, you're so small, it doesn't matter what the macro situation is. Like that's a joke. Like it might make it easier for you to like maybe hire some people that you might not have otherwise been able to hire because the job market's a little easier. But the reality is you're such a like tiny little baby. And when you're just starting off, it's like you only need a couple yeses. It's like if you can't get a couple yeses in any environment, like you don't, it's not a business. You're not solving a problem that actually matters. And so, for us starting off, I mean, it was a weird time. I mean, by the time we graduated, it was 2012. So it was a little bit different. But yeah, I think generally like, any entrepreneur that is looking at the macro situation is, as a first-time entrepreneur, at least, it's like that. I wouldn't even worry about it. I wouldn't even think about it. I would say like, is this something that I want to spend the next 10 years of my life working on? And it's like, the macro situation is going to come and go. And like, you just, as long as you're solving a real problem, like the binary outcome of like, will you keep moving forward is yes. It might be faster, it might be slower, but yeah, you don't have control over that. And one of the things that I, say to myself all the time, like, as I'm like in dark periods, it's like, well, what do I have control over and what do I not have control over? And like, let me focus on the things over which I have some level of control. And if you worry about things that you don't have control over, you go crazy. So
it must be pretty encouraging to people who are actually trying to find a startup right now.
Well, like I said, I'm not sure smart people should do startups, but that's another thing.
So
you do have to be a little bit delusional to do startups. A little bit realistic, but also like at some points you have to kind of like keep that delusion, because if you look at just the numbers for startups, they're really not great in terms of like how many startups fail and all of that. So you do have to believe in your own excellence. But I think being Yale graduates, I think there's no shortage of kind of like having that feeling. And then balancing that with like the consistent level of imposter syndrome, and kind of being like, I'm really great, and I can do this, and I'm sure I can do this, and I belong here. And then some days it's that, and some days it's like I don't even know what I'm doing here. Why? Like, how did I get here? And you're just kind of, I think what Max said previously about like try to keep an even keel so you're not like wildly swinging between those extremes is a really important skill to have.
Yeah, well, my version of imposter syndrome is I just know that everybody else is an imposter. So I'm just figuring it out. I'm just figuring it out as I go along. Try to put one foot in front of the other, do what makes sense, and that's all you can do.
Okay, so you're approaching 45. So I'm gonna pose a last question to you guys before we dive into the Q&A. And for those in the participants, feel free to write down any questions that you might have in either the chat box or the Q&A box. So lastly, what is one thing that you wish you knew before entering the profession? If you could give one tip to a budding entrepreneur from Yale. requires some thinking here. Can make it into 2 if you wish.
I'm trying to think that, I mean, like I didn't know anything when I started this. So it's a little hard to choose one. I mean, you know, kind of like I said, you know, I was like pretty convinced that like, you know, I went into Yale thinking I was like pretty hot stuff and that I was gonna, you know, like sort of thread the needle and like figure all this out. And it's like, they told me, like it's not that I didn't know that people were telling me it was gonna like be hard and take a long time. Like I heard them, but it was just like in one ear and right out the other. And so, yeah, I hadn't appreciated just like the level of, you know, like they would say in that grand strategy class, right? Like, oh, Clausewitz, you know, he's all about friction. There's a lot of friction out there. There's like so much friction out there, unbelievable amount of friction out there. And yeah, I hadn't quite understood that. I thought you just move the armies around on the map and it's easy, you know, but you're like carts are getting bogged down in the mud. People are dying of dysentery. It's a grueling pace. The oxen are fording the river. You know, it's just like, a lot of things go wrong out there when you're trying to get from point A to point B. And I hadn't quite anticipated how hairy it actually was out there.
Yeah, I think in terms of like tips and lessons, it's surround yourself with good people, whether that's people that's working with you directly, people who are advising you, people who are, you know, your support network. Like make sure you're surrounded by good people because there's no way that you can do this by yourself. You know, you're going to have some level of support. One thing that also surprised me was like the value of, or no, this isn't surprising. Like this is why people go to Yale. It's like the value of the Yale network opens up a lot of doors and a lot of connections. And one of the things that I've been able to do nowadays, which is really great, is I can now make some of those connections that I was just asking for as a student. Like as a student, you're constantly just asking for stuff and you're like, you know, I'm a poor student. I have no establishment here. I have no connections. Like, you know, can you help me out? And thankfully, like a lot of Yale alums and a lot of people are really, really willing to help you out if you're a student. But now that I'm on the other side, like I've made a lot more connections. I've made a lot more, you know, I've just have a lot more knowledge and you know, just understand a lot more about the industry, but also, you know, I have more of a network, and so like keeping track of that network is great, and also being able to kind of give time back to students and say like, hey, you know, I know someone that you should talk to, or I know someone that you should connect with, and keeping up with some of those folks that, you know, you've met. Like it's a very small amount of time that you're at Yale. It's just 4 years. You overlap with maybe like 8 classes or 7 classes worth of students above and below you, and like keep a hold of those relationships because you never know. It's like you never know where people end up. Your classmates are amazing, brilliant people, and they end up in a lot of really interesting places, and so you want to keep track of them, check in with them, and it's really great to see. Like it's astounding to me how many things have gotten done because of people that I've met directly through Yale. And you know, that always has surprised me. And that is one of the big kind of values of being at Yale and being at this institution.
Yeah, I have to agree. I went back for my 5th year reunion a few years ago, and I was really surprised by how many cool things that my classmates were doing in just that last few years. And for Max, I'm sure you want to say that like the broader even Yale graduate network is also very important and in finding your co-founder. So great. So we are at 5:45. So thanks, Ellen and Max, for sharing your insights today. Now we'll spend a few minutes on Q&A for about next 10 minutes. And then we'll move on to the breakout session for the networking opportunities. So I'm just bringing up the Q&A here. So the first question we have is, how do you start trying to bring more revenue into the startup? I'm not sure if this was geared towards either Max or Ellen, but you know, feel free to take a shot, either of you.
Hustle. That's it. That's all there is. Hustle, try hard, get in front of people, have no shame. That's the key. Yeah,
you get really good at having no shame as a startup. Like I hated public speaking. And then I just got thrown in front of investors to pitch, like, and competitions and all of that over and over and over again, to like, not even a problem anymore. And, you know, you get that same way with like sending cold emails, or, you know, setting up meetings, or catching up with people, or asking for money and doing sales calls. Like, it's a numbers game at some point, in terms of, you know, you try to make as many connections as you can, and you just kind of keep asking for stuff. And sometimes it happens, and that's great.
And then the next one is a question for Max. Can you talk about the transition from bootstrapping to having investors?
Yeah, I mean, we were very focused from the very beginning as a philosophical stance that like we just wanted, you know, we were kind of very lean startup. Like I started as a sophomore, and so I had food on the table and a roof over my head for, you know, junior and senior year too. And I was like, okay, well, now is the time to try to go out there and see if we can make some real dollars while our costs are very low, and sell real things to real clients. And we did. And we were able to then turn that into our first, like, basically pre-seed round right after I graduated, with a great group of investors that sort of totally got what we were doing and were very patient. In fact, they were so patient, they like that money they put in, you know, 8 years ago now or something. Like, we didn't have to raise money since then because we were just able to grow organically from there with this same, like, you know, just like very, you know, one foot in front of the other. Like, are we always making sales? Are we always growing? Are we always getting the blocking and tackling right? We're entering a new phase now where actually we're, you know, looking at raising a lot more money and going a lot faster. And that's an exciting thing, but it's also a thing where, like, if we were trying to do that from a, you know, just a standing start, you know, like that would be very different. You know, we can do that now with confidence because we've built the machine. We've been running this machine for 10 years. Like, we know how to do it. Like, if you put more money in, it goes faster at this point. That's the point at which it really makes sense to start to raise serious amounts of money.
I'm gonna actually skip to the next question because it seems pretty related. A lot of people seems to be really interested about finding investors here. As a new solo founder, do you have specific suggestions for where to look for a community of founders?
If you have an idea already, you can look for people like Max. You know, if you scroll back 10 years, smart, motivated college students. I think for me, it's like you kind of have to be in an environment where you're kind of giving back. So I've met other founders through like pitch competitions, or they'll have nights where you can do like pitch offs. And I know SciCity hosts some of these where you can pitch your idea, and you know, people who are interested in your idea kind of come and join you. I think where I've found a lot of success is like your idea supposedly is meant to help people, right? And what I've found is like there are people, if you're solving someone's problem and then that person has their own set of skills, like it's a lot easier to kind of bring them onto the team because one, they have direct experience with that problem. Two, ideally, because you're approaching them as, you know, they're someone who could also benefit from your solution, but they know if your thing is bogus or if it's going to be successful, right? Like if you can impress them with like, hey, I'm making the solution, but I also need help. Like you can find people who have skills kind of within the problem that you're solving. So that's another way that I've found folks. And then a lot of it is just like keep your ears open and post about it. And you know, also Twitter. There's a lot of people on Twitter. I don't know. I don't really use Twitter, but I hear that people talk about startup stuff on Twitter, and that was not useful advice. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I would say I don't think there's any shortcuts. I actually hate startup pitch events. Like, you know who you don't want to start a startup with is like somebody that's just there to start a startup. Like that sucks. Like what you should actually do is figure out what you actually care about. Go learn about it, start talking to people about it, and find like the excellent people in that field. Cause like the reality is the world is very small and there's like not actually that many killers out there. You want to find the killers. And it's like, that's who you want as your co-founder. Like you want somebody who's like, you want to go to war with that person. Like, cause that's what you're doing. That's what you're signing up for. It's like messy, complicated, hard over a long period of time. And so you want to find the highest quality people that you can. And there's not a lot of shortcuts, but there's a pretty clear path, which is like start learning, start meeting people, start going deep, Start figuring out like who knows what's up. And this is not like something that you do in a month. This is something that you do over like 6 months to a year minimum. I managed to get like profoundly lucky with my co-founder, where I kind of, one shot, one kill, but like, that's not usually how it goes. And you want to find somebody that's got a pretty complementary skill set to you too. So yeah, I did see this success question here. I do want to cover
Yes.
that. This is something that I think is actually really, really important. Gets back to this, what can you control, what you can't control. One of the biggest failure modes I see of Yale founders is they're very outcome focused. They're saying like, oh, I want to have an exit, or something. You have almost no control over some stuff like that. The only thing you have control over is what you do day to day to day. I mean, there have been moments in Sylvia Terra history where, like I said, we're looking into the abyss. Like, it's still possible in theory. Like, my investors don't want to hear this, right? But like, you could end up with a goose egg at the end of all this, right? Like, 10 years in, and that would suck. That would be so bad. That would be, I would not be happy about that, really. Happiness is optional though. But what I will say is, like, for me though, in my life, the way I think about it is, if I try doing this really hard and I'm convinced that this is a problem that's worth solving, and I just leave it all on the field, like, even if this thing doesn't end up getting to some outcome that I wanted, if throughout that whole process I was working hard for a long time on a problem that mattered, like that, at the end of the day, that's all you can actually ask for, I think. And so, if you have a different, like, positional version or an outcome-based version of success, I think you're setting yourself up for unhappiness for sure.
Yeah, I think for me, at the end of the day, I come out of it with like, did I learn something, and did I help someone? And those are like my two metrics. And hey, maybe I learned a lot of things, and maybe I helped a lot of people, but like, at the end of the day, did I learn something, and did I help someone? And also, I guess, did I not hurt myself in the process? But those are really kind of the things that you can control. I mean, I remember the hardest time for us was when we were running out of money. We were trying to do a deal and trying to get a strategic partnership up. And we were staring at the end of our runway, and we had to figure out like everything that we could do to keep some amount of funding so we could turn it into a good outcome. And that process dragged on for a really long time. And the thing that I had to learn how to do was like, how do I reframe the story, both for the people, like, I can't make a strategic partnership saying like everything's horrible and you're gonna be partnering with a company that's dead. Like, nothing will happen if I do that. And so it's like, how do I reframe the story into one of potential? And then also, when I'm reframing the story, it has to be something that I can believe in too. Like, I have to be able to tell that story convincingly. And it's not just like, I'm not trying to sell you a lemon. It's like, here is a lot of potential. Here is a lot of things that didn't go right, but here's how we can fix those things. And you get better at drawing that narrative. And sometimes, like, being able to tell that narrative well and have that connect to the other pieces of your life, like that to me is more meaningful, I think, than saying like, yes, we had an exit that was, X amount of dollars, because most people don't get there. And so the vast majority of people are going to be kind of in that middle ground. And so you kind of have to figure out how to tell your story and connect it to what you find important. I'm also seeing the book question. I think that is 100% a Max question. If you don't know, you should follow Max on Goodreads.
I don't get out much. I read a lot of books. It's true. I would say the best one is probably 4 Steps to the Epiphany by Steve Blank, but it is a terrible book. It is a extremely useful book. Like, every 3 pages, your brain explodes. Like, the format of the whole thing is like disgusting. It's terrible, but like the content in there is amazing. Getting Things Done by David Allen. Like, I base my whole life on that book. That book is amazing. If you're like, there are people that I know that like will take meetings with me. They're like, I got professors at HBS now that like have read this book, and they're like, Max, like, anytime you need a meeting, you just let me know, because my productivity is like 5x what it ever was before reading this book. And it's like astonishing to me that like highly effective people can even be, like functional without reading this book. It is a complete game changer. And then, 80/20 is good, but the title says it all. And The Partnership Charter is a book that is not good, but is a book that is extremely useful because lots of startups die because of issues with the co-founders. And having a clear-eyed view of what those are and how to deal with those and structure those, and even simple things like everybody needs to be vesting with 1 year cliff and 4 years. Like, you know, it's like, you would be shocked at how many times people don't do that. And then terrible things happen. Just like read the book. It's basic stuff. You don't have any excuse.
Sounds like Max has a lot of recommendations here.
Yes, because I have very few, because I am horrible at learning things from books. I am really bad at learning things from books, which is why I was an art major. It's like I took art classes and I took engineering classes where you got to build stuff, and like that was my Yale career. So I don't have a lot of useful book tips, so you should just listen to Max for that. I just read.
There's that great quote that says, you know, any fool can learn from experience. It takes a genius to learn from books. But it's less painful to learn from books too.
That's true. That's true.
Ellen, do you have any recommendation for classes for those who are actually still in school?
Ooh, good classes. I don't know. I took a lot of the classes where you got to build stuff, which is not usually like the Yale trajectory. So I tried to like stuff as many skills-based classes as I could. And if you don't usually take those classes, those are actually really good because it's a different way of thinking. And it also teaches you about failure, like really, really clearly. But in a way where it's like, okay, you know, you can fail at building something and then you just like try harder and learn more skills. And it gives you, it really empowers you because you're created some, at the end of the day, you have something like physically in front of you. And that can be an art class, it can be an engineering class, it can be, you know, it can even be like a music class, you know, something you created something and put it out into the world. So I'm a big fan of those. A personal favorite was the Intro to Metal Sculpture, where you basically just got to like weld stuff, which is great. Granted, all these classes are much better in their kind of non-pandemic forms. So if you have the opportunity to take them a little bit later, definitely do. I kind of regretted not taking a lot of the like really foundational Yale courses. I skipped a lot of those, and that's something that, you know, I've kind of gone back to a little bit and you know, either have listened to the lectures or kind of been part of those. You know, take some of those flagship courses that Yale is really known for, because it is there's a reason why they're so well known, and I think that's a big benefit of being at Yale. Also, languages, like I tried to get out of my language credit super early, and then like senior year I was like, oh man, like I'm not going to learn a language by myself, or I am aging out of the time where it's easy to learn languages, and here's a structured environment where there's like people around you that are motivated to learn the language. It's going to be really painful if you try to learn it some other way, and so I just like took a random L1 course my senior year, which was really fun. So if you've got room in your schedule, you know, there's a lot of things that you can do kind of only while you're in college.
Great. So we have 1 minute left to our networking session. So let's end it here. And for those of you who are interested, please join the separate Zoom link that was provided in the email to network with other participants, and as well as Ellen and Max. Thank you everyone for joining us today.